Let's see how changing the letter D on a sine or a cosine graph is going to change the graph as we look at it. So right here, you can see I have a cosine graph. I've also highlighted the x-axis in green so that we can really see where all of those middles are. So remember, a cosine graph starts high. So you have high, middle, high, and it repeats and repeats and repeats. So let's go ahead and add a number to this outside. I'm going to start by adding the number 3. What happened to the graph? If you look, the high was at 1 and now the high is at 4. And the low is at -1 and now the low is at 2. And what happened to the middle of the graph? The middle of the graph is now actually centered at 3. So it changes where the middle of that graph is. Let's try to make this a -2. Notice now that this graph that goes up 1 and down 1 from the center is now centered at -2. That's where the center of this graph is. We can also take a change in y, change in the d, and we can change the amplitude at the same time. And let's see what happens there. So let's do a plus 4 here. So notice the graph went up 4. And where is that center line to the graph? That center line is at 4. But if we add an amplitude onto the front of 2, notice that it stretches it around that center line. So the center line is still at 4, but we go up 2 to a high of 6, and we go down 2 to a low of 2 from that center line. So we can also, if we know the center line and the amplitude, we know what are the y values for those highs and what are the y values for those lows. So what is the center line of any graph? Well, that is given us by the value of d. Once you know where that center line is, if we add the amplitude, that will be where all of the high y values go. And if we take that d and subtract the amplitude, that's where all of those low y values go. Notice when I'm saying add and subtract the amplitude, I'm talking about the absolute value of that amplitude. So if we go back over to this picture, and we change this 2 from a positive 2 to a -2, notice that the highs are still at 6 and the lows are still at 2, even though we have flipped the entire graph. So you really want to remember, amplitude is always a positive number that we're adding and subtracting to that center line.